Good afternoon. I think it's important to start on time because it seems to me that there's always so much to say that if you don't start on time, you don't get nearly as much said as you'd like. We're here, in a way, I guess I must say, mourning and grieving. It's a very hard time for those of us who are Catholics. Some of us are angry, some of us are just in pain. Perhaps the anger will come later. But as we take up this topic today, we also want to look forward with hope, because as Catholic people, we are a people who have great hope, and we are resurrection people. Today we have, and I want to be very brief in the introduction so that they can get to their topics. We have a very distinguished panel here today to help us to sort some of this out and to look forward to the future. Dr. Sidney Callahan joins us today. Sidney holds the Paul McKeever Endowed Chair at St. John's University. She is a famous lecturer. She's a renowned writer. Every Catholic woman of my generation has read Sidney's work, and she has really been a model for so many of us. Father Bill Miscamble joins us today. Father Miscamble is a noted historian, and he is rector and superior of Moreau Seminary and has great wisdom to share with us today. Jorge Garcia is presently at Boston College, where he holds the position of professor in the Department of Philosophy. In his philosophical travels, Jorge has been at Rutgers most recently. Before being at Boston College, he has been professor of philosophy at Georgetown University and associate professor here at the University of Notre Dame. I suspect someday Notre Dame will bid to get both Dr. Garcias back to Notre Dame. Our final member of the panel is Bishop John Darcy. Bishop Darcy has been bishop in Fort Wayne, South Bend since 1985. Prior to coming here to the Midwest, he was, of course, on the East Coast. And you'll hear that, those of you who don't know him, immediately by the sounds from Bishop Darcy. He was Bishop of Boston for quite a while. And
auxiliary bishop.
Oh, no. I know that. Cardinal Law told me that. So he was auxiliary bishop in Boston and regional bishop of the Lowell region in Boston. So let me turn it over to the panel. Dr. Callahan will start. They have agreed to try to limit their remarks to 15 minutes and then give you the opportunity to ask questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I feel very comfortable and very happy when I'm here at Notre Dame. I think that one way to think about what's going on now is to think about it as sort of the crisis and cracks from underlying faults. Tectonic plates are shifting and have shifted in our church, and we see these gaps and openings, and perhaps we will see even more earthquakes in the future. As I think about this, two faults and two weaknesses that we are now forced to confront are sexuality and power, often combined in lethal ways, as they so often are. So to begin, I think I will just recognize a few of the cracks, just some of the pain and the shame and the distress and suffering that we feel. First of all, there are the victims and their families. Many have left the church. The one family that I know has left the church. And we have not yet heard from all of these victims, particularly not from the women. So I think there will be more wounds that will become more apparent, so more pain may be in the offing. This leaves the rest of us, the laity, who maybe never have known about this before, horrified, sad, angry, shamed. And for me, who live in New York City in the midst of lots and lots of anti-Catholic folk, to think of how they are gloating is a particular pain. So it might not be the best pain, but it's still there. I also think that the bishops are suffering. Now, this sample is of 6 bishops I've talked to, not Bishop Darcy, some of them are in great distress. Some felt that they had to take an action in Dallas in a terrible situation with the media. They were being forced into something. That others felt that they were not really doing full justice to the situation, particularly not full justice to their priests. Others are now faced going home to have to take actions against those people they felt had recovered in some way, and this is very painful for them. Some felt anger, expressed anger at their fellow bishops, those who had never done the things that they had done. If they had, in their diocese, had taken measures and other people had not done that, and those who had followed the guidelines could be very angry at those people who had not put any procedures into place, and then precipitated a crisis which they were also going to be suffering from. Those other people shall remain nameless. Some felt helpless in the bishops' conference, that there were rifts within the conference, that they were not able to even openly talk with each other, and not able to think about how what their right relation should be to each other or to Rome. And of course, I think many bishops suffered because of what was suffering of their own people. Finally, the good priests that we all know, truly suffering. One, from being identified with abusers. They also come under suspicion, and they have what I never realized before is can really be a true feeling, a vicarious shame for others. And they felt that they also have gotten no support. Some of them feel that they've been abandoned, hung out to dry, that the failures of certain bishops were being placed on their shoulders, that they were being scapegoated, and they were not really able to have the support and collegiality they felt needed from both either their bishop or from fellow priests. So all of this pain on the part of all of us has created distress, and it makes us think, could it have been avoided? How could we have dealt with this better, and what will we do in the future to deal with this? Now, I think the questions about power may even be easier in some ways than the questions about sexuality. How are we going to achieve the justice and the collegiality and the equality and the rights for those in authority and those under authority that were brought forth? These reforms were brought forth at Vatican II, but never fully implemented, so that we end up preaching to the outside world things that we do not do at home. As an ever-reforming church, we must now reform. We are paying the price for not having put certain reforms into place, and we may have to pay more in the future. I've spent 20 years working for the Association for Rights of Catholics in the Church, which is trying to bring collegiality into the Church. And I think it's become pretty clear, and many people know this. I mean, we have a long tradition in canon law and within the Church of how to obtain justice in an institution. And perhaps these reforms will come from the bishops, from the Voice of the Faithful, from other groups who are pushing for this. And I think we know that to make any difference, the reforming spirit must be embodied in institutional changes at every level of church life. And all the principles that allow democratic institutions to flourish, and we know them. As Americans, we have gotten them from our Judeo-Christian tradition and put them in practice. We know these principles, and all the world recognizes them. Everywhere, justice and fairness require accountability, representation. Those who are governed should have some say in who governs them, if not direct election, and some sort of representation. Separation of powers, transparency, particularly in when it comes to finances, guaranteed individual rights and due process, and those other procedures that help check the abuse of power. We never will get rid of sin, but we can make it harder to abuse power. Now, when it comes to sexuality, I think we're in more of a difficulty because here our tradition and the development of ideas and thoughts about theology, I call this the theology of the body, is in more dispute and in more flux. It has also been developing. We see the ever-reforming aspect of this. There's no more claims of the inferiority of women or inequality. There's no more discounting the body as impure. These are things that we have moved beyond. No more downgrading of sexuality or seeing marriage as a second-class state. The present Pope has participated in this move, in this development toward what I would call an embodied personalism that respects sexuality, respects women, respects marriage. Now, I think that I would disagree with his ideas about the nuptial body because I think that it is giving too much weight to complementarity. I think this is the wrong track, but I certainly recognize his wonderful beginning to think about this and to move us in this direction. I think when we look at where we're going in the future, where I hope we would be going, or what we need to overcome, I think we have overrated the role of gender and sexual orientation in personality and in abilities. To be male or female, to be gay or straight, to be married or unmarried, is only one developmental strand in a complex personality over a lifetime. We have to think about ourselves developing over a lifetime, and might even be, if not a minor strand, one strand when compared to, say, health, intelligence, character, and spirituality. So it seems to me none of these can be a bar to leadership, to ordination, because I think as a species we're much more alike than we are different, and to elevate these particular differences into categories seems to me to be a wrong move, and I hope that we will move away from that. So yes, this means that I am, and I have been since 1965, for the ordination of women, for the ordination of married priests. We have this already, of course. For the ordination of gay persons, we have this already as well. And certainly to affirm the celibate vocation as well, depending on whether people are worthy candidates and have been called by the Spirit and confirmed by the community. Now this sounds pretty much like a straight, if we talk about these terms, liberal agenda. However, I think we have to grant that many quote-unquote conservative critics in this crisis also have had important insights, which we should not fail to take into account, and many liberals, I think, do. I think we've underrated the power of sexuality. We have overrated gender and sexual orientation, but underrated the power of sexuality and the power of sin, and sexual sin in particular. We have not understood that the vocation of chastity in marriage or in celibacy is as difficult as it is. We have not understood the challenge and how holiness is wholeness and integration, and how hard this is to achieve, particularly how hard it is to achieve in one's sexuality. I think this was discounted after Vatican II because, yes, the 60s were a very naive time. I was too old to really be affected by the 60s, but I had children who were, so I understand. There was this rebellion against older strictness in morals, and I think in Catholic circles, knowing that now the inferiority of women and the impurity of the body and sexuality are no longer the way we can think or think about ourselves, this led to a certain permissiveness about sexuality, a certain discounting of how important our sexual acts and sexuals are too. If we had, so those are thinking, been wrong about birth control, which I think we were, that it was too punitive and wrong, and we had underestimated the importance in marriage of sexual intercourse, and the arguments did not convince, and did not convince many theologians and bishops as well, then weren't the other demands for control and chastity and sexual integrity also wrong, or not to be taken as seriously? So we began not to take the fidelity and the call for holiness as seriously as we should, and I think that is a conservative insight in what's happening now. Yes, also, as I'm a psychologist, I would say that psychology was partly to blame, too. Psychology is a young science that is always in conflict itself, and there were superficial strains that did not grant, which we now would, the biological underpinnings to our behavior, the evolutionary psychological developments, which mean that certain kinds of things are very much more incapable of changing than we might have thought at one time, and a kind of expressive what has it been called, expressive individualism. This was much marketed by certain people in psychology. Catholics know we're made for happiness and God will make us happy, but a certain secular corruption of that also crept in. I think we forgot how potent sin is, and particularly sexual sin, mostly because it can also produce self-deception, and that the power of pleasure and desire and immediate gratification can move the mind to denial. Now, today, I think we understand addiction more clearly, and addiction is a model that might give us some insight into the destructiveness of the power of sin. So to move forward in the priesthood, I think we all have to move forward. These deeper faults and deeper seismic shifts have to be worked out, and we can't form priests differently or get them ready to deal with power or to deal with laity or to think about their sexuality and in their lives unless we also deal with these looming problems of power, of how we deal with power and how we can understand sexuality. Can we confront them honestly? Can we speak? Can we talk? And this is one of our worst difficulties. The bishops could not talk to each other, and priests cannot talk to each other, and the laity cannot talk. Where are we going to talk? Where are we going to have this ability to talk and to confront these things, to test our own understandings, to come to some consensus, to learn, to explore openly? And where can women's voices particularly be heard? Well, here's one place. I, too, am a pacifist, and I'm on that side in that particular argument. But I like being here at the home of what I hear is the fighting Irish. So I am here to say my piece, to mix it up, to learn, and to thereby have hope. Thank you.
I'm very grateful to speak and honored to share the podium with two such thoughtful and committed Catholics as Sidney Callahan and Jorge Garcia, and also very glad to be here with our local ordinary, Bishop John Darcy, whose resolve and leadership on this issue has been important in guiding our local church through this trying time. I come to this panel, as Peg mentioned, from the stance, the outlook of a seminary rector and as a priest in the Congregation of Holy Cross. I think I'm about, at this stage, trying to train good priests to serve God's people. Priests who will go forth as co-workers, united in a single goal of building up Christ's body. and priests who commit themselves to what Pope John Paul has called a new evangelization, ready to proclaim Christ yesterday, today, and forever. I want to try and say a few words on how I view the crisis, if that's really the term, and then to offer a few thoughts on some ways forward, as the subtitle of our panel topic suggests. Surely Pope John Paul spoke for everyone here in stating that the harm done by some priests and religious to the young and the vulnerable fills us all with a deep sense of sadness and shame. These emotions are unavoidable if one faces the reality of the pain and the betrayal of trust involved in the clergy sexual abuse issue. We must keep clearly before us that concern for victims and for potential victims must be foremost. This is crucial. In this regard, it seems important that the Church try to draw attention to the reality that sexual abuse of minors is a far greater problem in American society than revealed in the number of cases linked to some priests in the Catholic Church. I've seen reference by an article by Andy Greeley, the research of University of Chicago scholars Edward Laumann and Robert Michael that asserts that up to 17% of Americans, equally men and women, were sexually abused before puberty. I don't presume to have the competence to evaluate such a research finding, but if they are anywhere in the ballpark, what we have here is an enormous problem, one that causes much pain. Clearly, this is more than a priest problem, but a human problem, and one that plagues both men and women. Obviously, the Church must provide firm guarantees of child protection and safety in its institutional settings. This is a given. But perhaps it must work further to encourage research and understanding of the pathologies that lie behind child abuse, the extent that it exists within American society, the cultural influences that continue to generate it, and how to treat best the victims of such abuse and the perpetrators of it. This is, of course, noted in Article 16 of the Dallas Charter. I trust it won't be forgotten. Now, without in any way seeking to minimize or diminish the work that must be done, crucial work, I do want to take some issue with the label crisis in the priesthood given to our panel. I appreciate full well that the clergy sexual abuse issue has led some to call for a public reevaluation of the nature and value of the Catholic priesthood. And yet I want to suggest that the crisis is not understood well if it is seen as a priesthood crisis. As we try to get some perspective on this painful matter, it seems clear to me that the fury which drove this issue was fueled by the outrage expressed at bishops who assigned offending priests and in a few cases reassigned them repeatedly from parish to parish, giving them renewed opportunity to abuse more children. I dare say that if this analysis is correct, the nub of the issue is poor leadership and proper accountability and credibility of leaders. Would we be having this discussion now if all the bishops had adopted appropriate standards and procedures, if not after the Louisiana case in the mid-80s, then at least after the Porter case in Fall River in the early 1990s? Would we be here if the sound judgment Bishop Darcy displayed regarding John Gagan in the Archdiocese of Boston had been followed in 1984? That said, I recognize fully that as we move forward, there are important changes that must be made in the areas of leadership and trust, transparency, openness, accountability. I guess they're the kind of power issues that Sidney was talking about. The Dallas Charter certainly focused, at least in some of those areas. But I want to go in a different direction and note the following matters as ways forward and as ways that contribute to the purification that will bring us through this sad ordeal as a stronger church. I want to pay some attention to these matters, and obviously I have to do so quickly. Renewed commitment by priests to their essential ministry, sound seminary formation, re-emphasis on the meaning of celibate chastity and its value for the whole church, fostering of an appropriate priestly fraternity, shaping a church of forgiveness, reconciliation, and compassion. I'm speaking for an hour, right, Peg? I've got 5 minutes left. I mentioned the failures of leaders and the problems of accountability as a preface to saying that as the clergy sexual abuse issue developed under the media's hot pursuit, somehow all priests and the priesthood itself seemed to get tarnished. It was guilt by association. The priest pedophile became a term of common currency, a label besmirching all priests. Celibacy somehow or other got branded as a problem. The suggestion was made that those willing to live it must be dysfunctional. In some cases, the priesthood was presented virtually as a pathology. And even those who didn't go that far pointed to a supposed, quote, closed clerical culture which infects the priesthood. This seemed to make all priests complicit in the scandals. In all of this, attention was focused on the, let us say, 2% of offenders. The 98% of priests faithfully pursuing their ministry tended to be passed over and ignored. This is the group termed by the Pope as the vast majority of dedicated and generous priests and religious whose only wish is to serve and do good. Well, it is to that group, the vast majority, toiling daily in the Lord's vineyard, that the responsibility of repairing the tarnished reputation of the priesthood falls. And I wish there was some magic wand, but there isn't. Restoring that reputation can't be done quickly or easily. The trust will be restored, however, when good priests continue doing what good priests have done for centuries, proclaiming the word of God and preaching about it with authenticity, ministering the sacraments, especially the Eucharist, and speaking words of forgiveness and consolation and compassion, and thereby sharing the life of Christ with others, and so building the Christian community. In doing this, priests have some factors going their way. On the one hand, Catholics have not abandoned their priests, somewhat to the surprise of, let's say, some folks who occasionally write for East Coast media outlets. Catholics still hold regard for their faithful pastors, and they extend support and encouragement. Perhaps I should say to you folk here, thanks. On the other hand, priests still rather like being priests. Whatever the temporary challenge to priestly morale brought on by the clergy abuse scandals, priests enjoy presiding at the liturgy, preaching and teaching, and working alongside their lay sisters and brothers. Obviously, if a way forward is encouraging priests to be faithful and committed in their ministry, the corollary is that the training of priests should lead to the ordination of men prepared to serve this way. In this regard, I think the news is hopeful. Much has been done in seminary formation in recent years, especially in the years following the Vatican visitation of seminaries in the 1980s headed by Bishops Marshall and Whirl. No doubt seminary formation can be improved, and I welcome the kind of assistance that might be rendered in this regard by the new apostolic visitation to seminaries and religious houses of formation. This visit will focus on the question of human formation for celibate chastity. We want to prepare good, mature, and holy priests. But I want to assert that that is what we have been doing. The seminarians I work with know that their best selves will be discovered only when they pass beyond self-centeredness and selfishness and truly follow Christ in giving of themselves to others. They are generous, faith-filled, and prepared to explore their religious and priestly vocation in an atmosphere which provides very few external supports for this. Careful procedures are pursued in screening of applications. Programs have been developed which deal directly with sexuality and celibacy, with developmental human maturity, with appropriate pastoral boundaries in relationships. Seminarians are regularly evaluated, both personally and in terms of pastoral performance. There is a much greater focus on the meaning of the priesthood and the identity of the priest. It is well to remember that most of the celebrated cases of clergy sexual abuse, have not involved priests ordained in the last decade or so. One of the most important ways forward is to re-emphasize the importance of celibate chastity and to clarify its value for the whole church. Growing up in my working class milieu in Australia, good ordinary folk understood at a gut level that celibacy was about serving others, that it was a way of loving and serving many people deeply, but in a manner that a priest or religious would be unable to do if they were in a single primary relationship. It meant an availability for apostolic service. I still think there's a lot to be said for that, but mere service is not enough to warrant the celibate calling. In the end, celibacy must be about more than service. It must be, as lived by good priests and religious, a lesson that the kingdom has not fully arrived, and that earthly life is a transitory one, awaiting a fulfillment which is yet to come. Priests living their celibate commitment well must not only serve God's people on the earthly journey toward the kingdom, but also must sacramentalize in their own lives the hunger and hope of the community for the kingdom to come. Am I out of time? I wanted to say some things about priestly fraternity. We've heard a lot about clerical culture as a negative. Priestly fraternity must be encouraged as a good support for priests. And of course, I wanted to conclude by saying that in all of this, we must be a church of forgiveness and reconciliation and compassion. And let me add a final word that's not a particularly popular one these days. This means extending care and forgiveness even to perpetrators of abuse. As members of a church founded on forgiveness, rooted in the redemption, we cannot simply banish people from our sight. Thank you.
I want to, I'm going to stay here. I'll try to make some remarks on moving forward. I could probably spend my 15 minutes just saying why I'm not really suitable to be on the panel. I'm not a psychologist, not a theologian, certainly not a bishop, a overeducated layperson of middling devotion, but I am a layperson of the epicenter of the scandal, as George Weigel calls it several times in his new book from Boston. So I suppose that is why I'm here. Meetings, I've learned that these events, which are usually called a crisis, a turning point, of course also a scandal, and in my reading I've learned that the word scandal, scandala, means stumbling blocks. I hope that we can move beyond these as stumbling blocks and perhaps turn them at some point into lamps at our feet to guide us forward. I've looked at two sets of literature. On one side, people like Gary Wills especially have suggested that this is a crisis of trust. And with him, Thomas Keneally's article on his experiences in the priesthood in the New Yorker, and Charles Burns in Playboy, and a number of others talking about their own experiences as priests. On the other side, George Weigel and Richard Newhouse have identified this as a crisis of fidelity. Certainly both are right. This is a betrayal of trust. Wills is right about that. Betrayal is the title, in fact, of the Boston Globe's book of essays on this. But it's a betrayal, of course, that's also rooted in a kind of faithlessness, a failure to keep faith by many, to keep faith with us, with the church, and a failure to keep faith with the various sorts of mission that people have within the church. Philip Lawler in the Catholic World Report has suggested one sign of hope in this time is that, in an odd way, those on the left and the right within the church, not happy with those terms, but whatever one wants to call them, the various extremes and the various wings of the church right now, ideological wings, are to a large extent united, and that he found that he frequently was agreeing with those with whom he had seldom agreed in various controversies within the church. I'm not confident that unity is long-lived, but perhaps it's a basis, a platform from which we can move forward. I want to talk about several areas where we could have a movement, some level of reform. First, with the seminaries, 2 points here especially. It's plainly important to continue to eliminate the elements of gay lifestyle that have been, that again, people on both sides of the ideological divide within the church have emphasized. I think it's Andrew Greeley to whom we are indebted, if that's the right verb, for the phrase "the lavender mafia" that sometimes has reigned in some seminaries. There is reason to think that important reforms have been undertaken in the last decade. Those need to be prosecuted, to be moved forward vigorously. Even if there is still a place for some people with homosexual orientations within the lifestyle, within the priesthood, people who, irrespective of that, and perhaps in spite of that orientation, nevertheless lead lives that are faithful, that are prayerful, that are chaste. Nevertheless, there's a need to root out that whitewashing, that endorsement of that sort of lifestyle. As well, with a second point within the seminaries is the importance of moving away from a psychological model that especially Weigel and Matthew Rose have demonstrated has been terribly destructive of those within the priesthood. Rather, what we need to do is to remember that self-sacrifice is self-fulfillment in the Christian vision, that self-mastery is the development of human potential, to take two buzzwords from the human potential psychology that Maslow and Rogers developed, and that apparently according to the reporters, to some journalists, have done a lot to shape seminary education. Secondly, with respect to the priests, my, again, inexpert reading on this is that many of the things that are discussed here, celibacy, marriage, women's ordination, are largely irrelevant to these scandals, and the efforts, even by the most learned, in some ways the most gifted intellectually, such as Gary Wills, what everyone thinks of some of his conclusions, as a man of extraordinary learning and intellectual gifts, but his efforts to tie all of this to problems in the priesthood, those to tie the scandals to problems of celibacy or the failure to ordain women or married priests are deeply contorted and twisted, and I think that's that failure afflicts some other writers as well. Professor Cavadini from here at Notre Dame has written well on these topics, but when he tries to show that by having perhaps women in the priesthood, what we would do is therefore break the or celibate to move to married priests, that therefore we would break the kind of clubbiness of the priests, which has helped to generate the crisis. Well, it's difficult to see the connections there. My own view on those topics is that we would need to have a much better understanding of notions such as complementarity and so on, which we simply have very little way of understanding right now. I think that we are perhaps indebted to the women's movement for helping us to see that prior models of complementarity were deeply distorted, sometimes by sexism. It seems to me that it's wrong-headed, therefore, simply to throw out that language and to throw out that imagery and that way of thinking about these models. But perhaps what does make sense is to recognize that we can't really move forward right now in that on them. It's probably a time, perhaps, to set aside some of the discussion until a later time, a later period, when we're able to employ that language and without the distraction of the current biases and buzzwords that we're afflicted with right now. Essentially, it seems to me that what we need here, I'm not in a position to lecture to others, but I take this as simply obvious that the main thing we need for the priests is to lead more priestly lives. Professor Weigel, Dr. Weigel cites my colleague Matthew Lamb, has suggested that probably few of the priests who have perpetrated the acts that have caused such scandal were leading lives of the sort that a priest should live, and praying the office, saying daily mass, that can't have been the fundamental orientation of their lives, at least not for the serial abusers. With respect to the bishops, it seems that among the things that are needed there is a greater willingness, I would suggest, for fraternal correction. Right now there's a controversy about the extent to which the National Conference would be empowered to discipline bishops, or perhaps at least to reprimand them, or to exert various forms of pressure on the bishops. But again, there needs to be greater willingness for fraternal correction. There more consultation with the laity, especially in areas of priestly formation, and I think also a greater openness here. I think I'd be disagreeing with Professor Appleby, but a greater willingness and a greater openness to direction and guidance from the Vatican on these matters. There does need to be more input to the bishops from the laity and from Rome as well. And the bishops, I would suspect, need to be more cheerful and more eager, in fact, to get it. On the Professor or Dr. Weigel also suggests that the Vatican itself may need to undertake some changes. He limits those largely to matters of information flow and communications strategy, but I think many of us think that there have perhaps been failures of a deeper sort, that there needs to be a greater willingness within the Vatican to help to hold priests and bishops accountable to increase scrutiny of the seminaries and of the sometimes of the dioceses, of the national conferences, and to employ greater to enforce discipline more strictly and more and in a way that will help to abet this reform. And I think that tied to that, there needs to be an emphasis or a willingness within the Vatican to de-emphasize the worries about giving scandal, which seem to be at the root of some of the unwillingness of the Vatican, at least in the early stages of the crisis, to take it sufficiently seriously. Certainly, if anything, we should have learned by now that inaction holds as great a potential to give scandal as does taking firm action. Here, I would chiefly just recommend to anyone who wanted to pursue these topics, especially Professor Dr. Weigel's new book on these matters, "The Courage to be Catholic." The last several chapters of which outline his suggestions for the seminary, for reform in the seminaries, within the priesthood, among the bishops, and even within the Vatican. But what I'd want to add is also the need for reform here in these institutions within the academy. The seminaries have, it appears, and here I'm speaking simply from journalistic reports, seem, at least for a significant period, to have failed in the proper formation of our priests, and the failures have to do with an unwillingness to develop, to speak from a theology that's rooted in a greater fidelity to the magisterium and to the tradition, to give a pride of place to forms of psychology that probably don't fit well with the Catholic understandings of the priesthood. And we need to remember that if the priests have, to some extent, been inadequately educated in their seminaries, we can ask the question, who taught the teachers? And of course the answer is we did. That is, the people at the Catholic universities and the psychology departments, the theology departments, the philosophy departments, and throughout, who have failed adequately to develop genuinely Catholic Christian alternatives within the disciplines, who would help to form the teachers that would be can help to form the priests in the way that we need that we need them formed in order to overcome these problems and to move beyond. But of course, it's not just problems in the seminaries, in the priests, in the bishops, the Vatican, or even the academy. It's a problem in all of us. We all need to lead lives whereby we can be examples one to another of fidelity, whether we're living as parents, as workers, as students. We all are in a position to give scandal, and we all are in a position to provide inspiration, and we should recognize that God is watching us at every time, and our brothers and sisters are as well, and we need to rededicate ourselves to lead lives that will where we can, to some extent, however unworthy we are, help better to serve as exemplars. Let me just close with a quotation that I probably should have come across from scripture reading, but in fact I came across in one of the Catholic magazines that I was reading in the course of trying to do some background for this panel. "Great is the wrath of God kindled against us, because our fathers have not obeyed the words of this book." It's something to think about. The wrath is not kindled simply against the fathers. It's kindled against us, in part because of the infidelity of our fathers. But oftentimes it's the child that's the father of the man, and the infidelity reaches all the way down to us as well. Thank you.
To be here, it's distinguished scholars, and Bill, including Bill, who's Miscamble is my good friend. My background is seminary, and so I want to speak out of that. A spiritual director in a seminary, and for many years, and then auxiliary bishop of here. And I'll refer to two documents. I brought a few with me. There won't be enough. I'll give my panel's colleagues should get preference, and I'll refer to them, and I'll leave a piece of paper with address, and if anybody gives me their address, I will send them copies. It seems a place to start, and by the way, I think the best definition I've ever heard of Notre Dame was given by a place that we all have great affection for, and I certainly have, was given by Walker Percy, who received the late Tardy Medal here once, and had never been here, but had always heard about it, and he gave a beautiful self-deprecatory reflection, and he said, Notre Dame, he said, I've always heard of it, and here I am getting an honor. He said, a community of scholars under Our Lady. And that's the spirit, I think, in which we gather, in which I talk about my remarks. I think it's important to start with what is a priest. Jesus Christ overcame the priesthood of the old law, which was offering a goat or a calf or a bull. He gave himself. In Hebrews 5 and 10, he placed his sacrifice in the head of the book. It is written to me, O Lord, I have come to do your will. We read he was heard because of his reverence through loud cries and groanings. We read in Matthew, the Gospel of Matthew, my heart is nearly broken with sorrow. And Luke, Father, if it be possible, let this chalice pass from me. Yet not my will, but thine be done. I have not come to be served, but to serve, to give my life as a ransom for many. So this is the priesthood of Jesus Christ. The total gift of himself in response to the Father's will, and for us, for you and me. There's no other priesthood. That's the only one. We all share in it through baptism, the baptismal priesthood that's outlined so clearly in the Second Vatican Council in Lumen Gentium, that it's the gift of ourselves to do his will, to keep the commandments, to offer worship and praise to God, to raise my children in the right way. My choices, my decisions will be according to his will. That's Hebrews. In the head of the book, it is written to me, I come to do your will. We're sanctified by his will, not by a goat or a calf or a bull. We all share that. But we're a religion of sacraments, signs, word and sacrament, word and signs. The ministerial priesthood, according to Vatican II, drawing on the great tradition, differs from the priesthood that we all share, not just in degree, more intense, but in kind. It's different, but it's a service. It's not power. Power's been used. It's not power. It's service. It's love. It implies decisions that are difficult, pastoral decisions for a bishop and priest that might be difficult, be misinterpreted, misunderstood, but it's a service. It's closely linked, it's distinct from, yet closely linked. One theologian says of the ministerial priesthood, without Jesus Christ, it has no meaning. Without your priesthood, and mine, because I'm baptized, without the baptismal priesthood, it has no purpose or use. Yet he says it is indispensable. If you want to hear the word of God, if you want to have the Eucharist, if you want to have the sacrament of penance, if you want to have a priest anointing, if you want to have... But it's more than that. It's more than what he does. The priest is the shepherd. It's the sign value. Someone comes and lives on your same street and has only one interest, that you know Christ and that your children know Christ. So it's his sign value, which is all the reason why this has been so painful. And as Weigel says in his book, even though the priesthood has been under attack theologically and all the rest of these years, it shows that it has stayed in the heart of the people, how important it is and how central it is to their well-being spiritually, that this eruption has caused them so much anguish and pain. I came into the seminary in '68. I was 9 years in a parish and then was sent to study ascetical theology. I didn't think it was a good idea because I couldn't spell it, but I went anyway. And I got a degree in what's now called spiritual theology, the study of prayer and all that, to be a spiritual director. I came back to the seminary. I was there about a year, '68, Vietnam War raging. A priest I'd studied with, he also talked funny because he was from Boston, but They were all minor leaguers with an Australian on the panel. But anyway, who had studied with me, an oblate of Mary Immaculate, and became then and since my spiritual director and confessor over many years. And he came to visit, and I said, Don, I think we have a lot here that shouldn't be priests. You know, I'm just finding my way. I'm saying, Bill, you're just finding your way. What's my role here as spiritual director? I have my degree, but you have to learn by doing. He says, John, I'm sure you have. He said, we have some who have no right to be priests. To me, this was very important and guided me in regards to the Gagan letter. When I was in my last years in the seminary, we would ordain 6, 7, 8, 10. I was in a class of 52 for Boston, and 78 if you count all the others. I would know 2 or 3 or 1 that I had gotten out, who, as my friend put it, had no right to be priests. I felt I had done more for the church in some cases. In those, I was known as Darcy the Hatchet Man in those years. I think now more than I should have gotten out. But anyway, then 75, after being ordained a bishop, I stayed in this work, as I understood it now to be. With this Pope, we have the extraordinary writings. Every Holy Thursday comes a letter, based always on Vatican II, on the nobility of this life, on the beauty of the life, and on celibacy, not essential to it, but congruent with it. Sign. We read now in recent weeks, priests and many laity in the breviary or liturgical hours, all the things of St. Augustine on Ezekiel, talking about the Good Shepherd who takes care not of himself, does not feed himself, but feeds the flock. And it's very inspirational. In 75, I became a bishop, and a few years later, a committee of bishops, we wrote this pastoral, and I wrote most of it with a committee, a letter on priestly formation. The big focus was on admissions. And I studied all church documents and found out the church had been saying this for years. Let me say a word about celibacy and a word about, picking up on Sidney, should a person with a homosexual orientation be admitted to the seminary and be ordained? First of all, celibacy is not required for the priesthood, but in my judgment is congruent with it, because the priest makes visible, makes present Christ the Good Shepherd. You know, Augustine's thing could be applied to a bishop, the classic phrasing which is found in Second Vatican Council and in the document on church. Augustine said in one of his homilies, one of his sermons, "With you I am a Christian, for you I am a bishop. What I am with you gives me joy. What I am for you frightens me." The first is a joy, the second a responsibility. Why would he be frightened to be a bishop or priest? Because Christ died for the flock, and the priest or bishop has to be like Christ in his unselfish service and love. So I think a very high degree of nobility and of goodness and of spiritual maturity and unselfishness is necessary for a priest. Celibacy is a way of love, or it's nothing. But I think the key in the seminary today is helping the young man to understand why he is becoming a priest. I think he has to know. That Christ. He has to believe. It's a growth of faith. He has to believe ultimately that the call is from Jesus Christ. May not fully accept that until he's ordained, but he has to be open to that. And more now, he has to accept it before he's ordained. He's giving up something very beautiful. I'm trying to look forward, because one of the things Professor Solomon gave us was to look forward, reform. he's giving up something very beautiful, a lifelong relationship with a good woman, children, grandchildren. That comes more important later. Grandchildren, family. He has to know that he's giving up for something beautiful to be a priest, okay? And the priest, as the Pope says, is not chosen by the community, but is a gift of Christ to the community. And so, celibacy is seen in that light. I think you have to, a spiritual maturity. What we did in this, that no one else has done. Everybody says you have to have psychological screening, have to psychological testing. You do. But for what? So we tried to say, what kind of, well, we're the experts, priests and bishops, we're the experts, we're living the life. What kind of man do we want? What kind of man should be helped to another way of life? In Vatican II, notwithstanding the regrettable shortage of priests, due strictness should always be brought to bear on the choice and testing of students. God will not allow the church to lack ministers if the worthy are promoted, and those who are not suited to the ministry are guided with fatherly kindness and due time to adopt another calling. These should be directed in such a way that, conscious of their Christian vocation, they will zealously engage in the lay apostolate. They have a vocation. It's not to the priesthood. The way to more priests, so desperately needed. I could give instances in our own diocese here. We're amalgamating parishes, which we should do anyway, but a bishop knows, and religious superiors know, that the shortage is severe. The way to more, so desperately needed, lies through ordaining people of quality who will draw people of quality, and refusing to accept people with pathologies or people who do not have this vocation. The vocation is from God. When in the seminary, when we began to try to work on this to improve it, people used to say, "You're playing God." No. God gives the vocation, but the church has the light under God's grace to make a human judgment, not infallible. This person has vocation, this person does not. I'm sure my vocation director thinks I'm much too strict. This year, 8 came to me, 8 after going through the psychological screening and all the rest. 8 came to me. I accepted 3. I wish I could have accepted 8, 10, 20. But I think one of the ways bishops should be held accountable, I think there's 2 things a bishop should never give to anybody else, never delegate. 1, he decides who should be in the seminary. Only him. He decides who should be ordained. That's why I've never joined national committees, because I prefer to stay home and do things like this. Also, the bishop should be the only one who transfers a priest, not personnel boards. That's his charism. People made their promises to him and their vows to him. I have to be 2 minutes? Okay, thank you, Peg. A couple of concluding things. This has engaged me for 30 years. This thing, 30 years. I could talk forever, but homosexuality. Weigel's book lays out some very fine areas of reform, as the professor said. I disagree. I found him a little contradictory on the homosexual issue. I think he said, no, they should not be, but yes, they could be under certain circumstances. I would be opposed, and that's my position in this diocese. Why? It's the nature of the celibate priesthood. You give up something very beautiful that's very attractive to you, to be married, to have children. And that touches a deep part of our humanity, our human needs. And it's also very beautiful, for something beautiful. The homosexual person is not attracted to marriage. See? He's not attracted to it. That's the first thing, the first reason. Secondly, when you choose a heterosexual young man to prepare for the priesthood, you don't put him in an environment with attractive young women. You put him in with other men. The homosexual person, you're putting him in, and he'll live most of his life with men. Third, you change deeply the nature of the seminary and the nature of the priesthood. If this is, and by the way, this is also based on my experience as a bishop, experience with priests. So this is the way forward, I think. Is the situation I don't think seminaries have faced this. Some have. Cardinal Bevilacqua happened to have breakfast with him in Chicago at the meeting of National Catholic Black Catholics, and he has that principle in his seminary. Susan Stuyvesant on the faculty at Notre Dame here, associate director of the counseling, does our screening, and she and I work very close together. Let me conclude. Pope John Paul II said, there's no pope has written more on the priesthood. I suppose, though, like Cardinal Newman, that later his theology flowered. Many say in Vatican II that the teaching of John Paul II will guide us, certainly in the priesthood for centuries. A priestly vocation demands human and Christian maturity, so that the answer to this call may be based on faith. This is not the Pope. This is a conciliar document. And so seminarians may be able to understand the sense of a vocation from God and realize its demands. This is the Pope. The priest who welcomes the call to ministry is in a position to make this a loving choice, as a result of which the church, this is the priesthood, this same kind of thing is in the ordination ritual, as a result of which the church and souls become his first interest. And with this concrete spirituality, he becomes capable of loving the universal church, and that part of it entrusted to him with the deep love of a husband for a wife. The great priests I have known over the years were quietly convinced, and I think this is necessary for the celibate priesthood, that they would be good fathers and good husbands. It's the same maturity for both. The ability, we call it oblative love, to make a gift of myself for marriage and for the priesthood. The great saint of reform, I'm almost finished, Peg. The great saint of reform, Catherine of Siena, in one of her dialogues, quotes the Lord in this way: I tell you, the more the mystical body of Christ is filled with trouble now, the more it will abound in delight and consolation. And this shall be its delight. This, by the way, are 7 columns which I wrote in the spring, and the South Bend Tribune, not as noble as the New York Times, but a great paper in its own way, published all of them, as did the 2 papers in Fort Wayne. This is back to Catherine of Siena. And this shall be its delight, the reform of good holy shepherds, who are flowers of glory, who praise and glorify name, offering me the fragrance of virtue rooted in truth. This is the reform of the fragrant blessing of my ministers and shepherds, not that the fruits of the bride needs to be not to be reformed, because it never spoils or is diminished by the sins of its ministers. But I, eternal truth, promise to refresh you, and after your bitterness and pain, I will give you consolation, along with great suffering in the reform of Holy Church. The Pope said we are called to a holier priesthood, a holier episcopacy, a holier church. My good friend John Cavadini, in a beautiful article, made the point of the difference between scandal and holiness. Scandal is open by very nature. Holiness is hidden. We're all called to greater holiness. But we're also called in the seminary to a lot of tough decisions, in whom we accept in the seminary, whom we ordain, whom we keep in the priesthood, and in our spiritual reform of our priesthood. And we need to, no one is excused. We all must do this. But I agree with Catherine of Siena. The future is bright because of the Holy Spirit and the protection of Our Lady. Thank you.
I would like to thank our panelists, Bishop Darcy and Father Miscamble. You provided us powerful affirmation in your words and in your lives of what it means to be called to holy priesthood. You displayed incredible humility here today, exempt problems of priesthood, and some of the problems that the church will face as we move in hope, to a restored church, not just to a restored priesthood. Sidney and Jorge, thank you for pointing out the faults and cracks that we have. Your remedies are different, but you identified, I think, the same set of faults and cracks. And we'll move forward with those also. It's wonderful to be here at Notre Dame, where there's a community of scholars, as Bishop Darcy said, a community of scholars at Our Lady's University, a community of scholars under Our Lady, a community of scholars that remembers the title of Our Lady as wisdom. Remembering that we are that community of scholars, let us feel free to raise some questions and listen carefully to the answers that we have for one another. So for at least a couple of minutes, we have time for a few questions. If you'll go to the microphones for your questions. Nathaniel.
Nathaniel Hannon, Oxford University. For a couple of years now, I have looked forward with great joy to the day that I might be given the chance to join the Congregation of Holy Cross. This is not an easy thing to discern for anyone, but it's the kind of thing that one thinks about. That kind of decision, I think, has become somewhat more difficult after the Dallas Charter for the following reason, and I would invite some commentary from our panelists, especially the clergy, on how prospective seminarians might think about this. Certainly, I understand the anger at those who have brought violence where their vocation is only to bring peace. We who are thinking about being seminarians are in a special way offended, because now whenever one tells someone that one is interested in being a priest, some people consider us to be moral monsters from the beginning. But the thing which makes it especially difficult is that in the Dallas Charter, while they certainly have punitive measures that will be successful in some degree, there's very little due process for the accused mentioned. I would be less concerned about this, except that I happen to know a couple of people at two other institutions who have been falsely accused. And fortunately for one, it had fewer consequences, but for the other, for a number of years, it nearly destroyed them. I would invite some commentary on how people who are malicious may not be given further power by our efforts to prevent our difficulties.
You want to go first?
Nathan, first of all, in this diocese, there was a great deal that had to be faced when I first came, and was faced. There was one priest who was falsely accused. The diocese spent, I just shared this with our priest, $154,000 defending him, and it was thrown out of court because because the person making the charge, according to the judge, could not said the person could not tell between fantasy and reality. It was a grotesque case. The priest had been a good priest all his life. He was very hurt by it, of course, but he was defended. Secondly, have courage. I mean, Dorothy Day said, and Pius XI both said, and this is quoted in Professor Weigel's book, thank God has asked us to live in a difficult time. It's no stage for mediocrity. There's no time for mediocrity. I mean, I would, don't be timid. I mean, if you think God is calling you, you can't be timid. In the Archdiocese of Chicago, which in '93 had made a lot of mistakes, then began to address it seriously, they found over 60 years, 1.6% of the priests who had accusations. It was 1.6 was the total. Only one was a pedophile. The other, by the way, this is getting off the track of your question a bit. The others, it was towards teenagers, which is homosexuality. Pedophilia is not homosexuality. But I mean, you know, in the seminary you get guidance, you get care. Seminaries have been reformed and improved. You find out whether you should be a priest. You know, it's Jesus Christ is calling you. And I think, now the other point you brought up, Cardinal Dulles spoke of that, in a letter, in an article rather, before Dallas, and mentioned that at Dallas, he's not a voting member, but is a speaking member of our since he's not a bishop, he said that the church has checks and balances. I mean, canon law is, the dialogue between the bishops and the Holy See in the last 10 or 15 years, we have felt that the Holy See has not understood our problem and has been too defensive of the rights of priests. But that's the tradition of canon law, against arbitrary bishops, which there are in history. You can't believe that, but there are. And so that's been the position of the church. So I think, as Sidney brought out, in canon law there is great defense, and if a person is pure of heart, that's the best defense. If a person of good conscience, that's the best defense. So people are defended who are falsely accused, and it brings out a very good point. I think. But I don't think anyone should refrain from considering a vocation because of this. When I visited my seminarians, all of whom are in Boston, because I was spiritual director there, and the attitude of some of them was, last May when I visited them, they went through all this, the people at the gates every day with the media, and there were two good answers. One man said, I want to be a priest. Unlike these men who did these things, I want to show people that you can be a priest and live your vows, as like the priests I've known. The other one said he had a sense of history. He was a history buff, and had read about the Reformation, Council of Trent, and all those things, and saw what the church has been through. It's not a time for mediocrity. I would say go forward.
Nathaniel, many dioceses have commissions in place and have had them in place at least since 1993. And I've served in the Diocese of Scranton since 1993. And there's always defense for the priest who is wrongly accused. And the diocese spends a great deal of effort, and financial resources are expended to defend the priest who is falsely accused.
I think we should have more questions.
Okay.
First of all, particular thanks to Bishop Darcy and Father Miscamble. I know you must be very sick of this topic, and I'm sure we all appreciate your being willing to talk about it again. I spent 3 years teaching philosophy to seminarians in a pre-theology program. The vast majority of them are just what Father Miscamble described, good men there to serve God. More than I would have liked to see were not. They were, as Bishop Garcia said, had no right to be priests, intellectually not up to the task, warped views about sex and women among many of them. I know that not all bishops have your high standards, Bishop Darcy. Given the shortage of priests, and how do you think this will happen? How do you think it will be possible to maintain those standards across the country in the current situation?
I think that we have no choice. I mean, I think the nature of the life requires it. I think the way, as I said in my remarks, the way to more so desperately needed lies in only ordaining people of, we don't want to go the other extreme of supermen, which would leave us all out, except maybe Bill and Dave here and a few people like that. But we need. So I just think that's the time, as we said in here, in the document, which was very hard, I must say, to get through the New England bishops at the time. Very, very hard. We said we don't have enough priests. We wrote it to the seminaries. We don't have enough priests to send you. We wish we had enough young men to send you. We wish we had more, but we only want. It may be that a future generation will get the rewards of sufficient priests. We can only face the task that Providence has given to us, and I think that this is the way I think that the role of the lay people, not because of the shortage of priests, but because of their baptism in ministry in the church, must be fostered more. And in my diocese, I found when I came here early, and there was a priest with a difficulty like this, and it was told to me by another priest who had been told by the mother of someone who, and so we sent the priest for therapy, and he told the people he had refused an assignment, and the bishop was sending him to a mental hospital. He had indeed refused an assignment, but that wasn't the reason that he was going, and they had to send another priest down to preach at all the masses and say, no, he's going for another reason, and he knows the reason. When some of those priests left us, it didn't hurt our morale. The morale of the presbytery. You know what I'm saying? Even though they didn't know all these things, they knew these priests had serious problems. The other thing is we have ordained, and some here, I think Professor Ferdoso had a conversation with him. The priests in your parish the last several years, Fred, you would extraordinary. Not enough of them. Not enough of them. But when you ordain one, like we're ordaining about one a year, when you ordain one who has quality, that helps the older men when they see someone come along that joins them, whom they know would be maybe a professor in a university, maybe would be a very good teacher in a high school, and would be a good father and good spouse. That helps the older priest. So I don't know whether the root of your question is, should we ordain women or should we ordain married men? The Pope says, and I'm of 1,000,000% agreement, that the Church is not authorized to ordain women, that this is from the apostles. And secondly, as regards celibacy, I think that celibacy is the way for the Western Church. Weigel makes a claim that it's the Eastern Church, but even in the East, bishops have to be celibate, and there's no tradition in the East of, as Dave would be a better expert on this than I, there's no tradition in the East of priests marrying. There's a tradition of ordaining married men. So I don't think that's the answer for the West, but I think we need, and we've been a little slow on this in this diocese, we need to amalgamate parishes too, and it's not only a shortage, it's a better extension of our personnel. But I don't have an easy answer. I think we're going to go through a hard time.
Thank you. I would like to address the question of reform. I, of course, come from the outside. I'm not Roman Catholic, but when one Christian church suffers, then they all suffer. I have one question and one short story. The question is this. I grew up in a German Protestant environment, and since I was very involved in the church as a lay person working a lot with ministers, I experienced a great difficulty which German Protestant married ministers had. Their spiritual supervision on a county level was usually entrusted to a person called the Propst. But this Propst, who was supposed to be the one to whom the ministers could turn for their spiritual problems, was at the same time somebody who was placed in a hierarchical position where he could also contribute to change of positions, that is, advancement decisions. So that seemed to me, and many ministers confirmed that to me, not a good idea, to give the spiritual guidance to somebody who also was responsible for worldly advancement among those Protestant ministers. So it didn't seem to work. Many Protestant ministers were left alone with their spiritual problems. Now, in Orthodoxy, I experience a different situation. All priests are expected to have a spiritual father or a spiritual mother. So they regularly confess, or at least talk over the phone if they can't get there. Is there some regular spiritual care for priests in the Roman Catholic Church? That's my question. My little story is this. When I read the biography, and Tris is here to correct me on any small things which I always forget, names, places, dates, of John of San Francisco, that name is right, the great bishop and wonder worker who died in the 70s, Thank you. I knew you would do it. There was a biography written by, I think, Seraphim Rose, but you'll correct me on that one, who was going to a seminary. And he was going to be a priest at that seminary. And he has described what happened when John of San Francisco, the bishop, came to visit the seminary. This monk, this man, Seraphim, was sitting in his room late at night working. Then all by a sudden he hears in the hallway a shuffling of steps. And the steps stop. And then after 10 minutes, the shuffling of steps move on. Stop. And it went like that until the steps stopped in front of his door. And after 10 minutes, they weren't on. And so that meant, he found out then later, that the bishop, when he was visiting the seminary, was spending some part of his night praying in front of the room of each of the seminarians.
Thank you.
If I could comment before there is spiritual direction in the seminary, and I bring this out here. I would wish, unfortunately, in some seminaries, a man might be great in canon law or biblical studies or dogma. That doesn't mean he has the expertise of a spiritual director. I think the reason I sent my men to St. John's was that we all had degrees in spirituality, not to overemphasize, but that was all we were doing. So I think there's need for part of the reform that spiritual directors who confront a person, not just encourage. It's not a question of counseling. It involves some counseling, but that's a need of reform.
All consciences have now ended. Please make your way.
Can we hear these two?
Yes, you should. No, but Father Miscamble, do you have something to say about...
I would just make a point that it's not only in the seminary that a priest should have a spiritual director. That continues on after his ordination. So the idea of spiritual mentorship...
Your attention once again.
Thanks a lot.
We'll begin at 3:15 p.m. Thank you.
Thank you. So that spiritual director relationship, I think, is deeply important. It's tied up with this whole notion I would have liked to have said a few words about priestly fraternity, about the priest having support structures that help him live out his vocation well. Spiritual direction is a crucial part of that.
Mine is just a really quick question for clarification. I'm confused about what I hear about the seminaries. I hear very conflicting things. When conservatives call for a return to stricter teaching about sexual morality and a stricter, people say, oh, but these guys who've all been accused, they were trained in the old seminaries, and then I hear about this Lavender Mafia business and the psychological model. Well, that seems to have been the newer seminaries. And then I hear that they were all improved after, in the last decade. But then, so which is it? I mean, which of these three models of seminaries are the ones that are the problem, or are they all a problem, or what? I'm just confused.
Well, I think the answer to that question can be straightened out empirically. I think you can go through the data of the various dioceses and find out when the men have been ordained, and that certainly would answer your question.
Yeah, I haven't seen that.
Sure, I know we haven't seen that, and so these accusations are uncertain.
Yeah, everybody blames the seminaries of a different period, and I'm confused.
And I think there's an overgeneralization about seminaries without looking at individual seminaries as well. They vary in quality, in the quality of the seminarians attracted to them, and in their implementation. Now, I use Basil Fawlty as my model for running my seminary, so I always get a little embarrassed when Bishop Darcy begins talking about the need for all this spirituality training. I'm trained in American diplomatic history, and I'm an expert on the Cold War. Sometimes I hope that good common sense can help in the running of a seminary. I think that is a key factor, and the willingness to call things as they are. This is in brief detail, Marion, how I see, again, generalizing far too much, but the story of seminary formation in the United States. prior to the Second Vatican Council, they were run on a very rigid, structured basis with very, very clear expectations. All hell broke loose in the 60s, not just in the seminaries, all over the darn place. The whole sexual revolution takes place. People are set out on their priestly ministry, and what amazes me is how many good priests navigated that tough journey so bloody well. They navigated through a system that had provided a lot of very rigid but nonetheless support structures that sort of kept them in line. They all disappeared. And everyone's talking about emotions and feelings and affectivity and so on. And I think a lot did happen in seminary formation. There were gay subcultures, etc., that developed in some seminaries. With the Marshall investigation and the effort, I think, in the 80s, that development has been significantly corrected. The Donald Cozzens book, he was rector of a seminary in Cleveland, I assume he knows what he's talking about, at least for Cleveland, would say that there are still significant problems. I don't know enough about all seminaries. But what I do know from visiting a number of places is that there has been a major effort to improve the quality of formation, the entrance standards. I wouldn't dispute Karen's point that some may get through those entrance standards who are not suitable for priestly ministry, but that the trajectory, the pendulum, is for much improved seminary formation. That is what we have to work at and continue. That's what I seek to do at Moreau Seminary here at Notre Dame. I hope, Nathaniel, you'll still be interested in it. I'll speak, and maybe I should have brought vocation literature in my pockets here.
You've been very patient, so let's allow one last question.
Okay, this question is more about the priest shortage than it is about the scandal. I think most of the people in this room would either be raising children or some of us are teaching CCD. How do we fight the perception in the culture that celibacy is a bad thing, along with the perception that poverty is something you don't want to get into and obedience is just horrible? I mean, how do you deal with these values that people are getting even in Catholic homes, and try to reach out to people from this high on up? How do we bring them up so that they respect the priesthood?
I would like to just say one thing, that is, when these questions came up before to Jesus, there was this one answer: come and see.
Yeah.
Find people for them to come and see.
And I say, if you're looking for some kind of sort of easy middle-class American existence, then priesthood is not for you. It requires a call from God, so you're responding to something, you know it in your gut, but then you have to give yourself. It involves self-sacrifice. People have to know that if they're looking for, just getting their, quote, needs met or something like that, but of course it's the Christian story for all of us, lay ordained. It's in somehow or other giving of oneself that you gain, you find life. So I say from the earliest days, when you're teaching your CCD class, you've got to start talking to people about giving of themselves. If we have more of that, I suspect there'll be more folks willing to commit themselves to this way of life.
And it brings out that the religious education teacher in the parish is countercultural. The church is countercultural. And the answer is Jesus Christ, who was celibate, who was poor, who was obedient to the Father's will. And it's the only, and it's the only way to happiness and to joy. And I think young people, look how many young people here. I think young people are more open to this. I don't know what the professors teach, but I think this generation is more open to it. If you go to World Youth Day, and even if you go into a parish, I think they have a lot of tough questions for the church, but I find them more open because they're so repulsed by the sexual permissiveness and that kind of thing, and even when they might be involved in it sometimes.
Well, let's thank our panelists once again. Bishop Darcy's pamphlets are up here. There are just a few of them, but he also said if you sign up, he'll have them mailed to you.
You inspired me.
Thank you.
We'll fight another time.
Yes, we will fight another time.